Alright guys, we are working on the Dana 60 swap into a 1990 Ford F-250. For those of you following on Instagram, you know me as Chewy the Brick. So, the process today, I did some of the preliminary work getting ready to pull the Dana 50 off the front of the truck. Some of the tools you're going to need, you don't have to use some of these. You can use hand tools or power tools, whichever is most convenient for you. But you're going to need at least a 1/2 inch impact, 3/8 impact, possibly a little ratchet if you choose to. It's not required, but it definitely helps. Then you're going to need a 21mm wrench and a 15mm wrench, a 13/16 socket, a 9/16 socket, a 18 and 21mm sockets, a pair of dikes, flathead screwdriver, and a pair of needle nose. Another tool you're going to need there is pry bar, just to help you kind of get things off the truck. A jack to get the truck up and off the ground for you to get underneath. An oil pan to drain all the differential fluid and any brake fluid out of your front end as need be, and gloves and towels if you so desire to help kind of keep the mess on yourself and your surroundings at a minimum. And if you notice under the truck, I put cardboard underneath just to try and keep the mess to a minimum as much as possible. So let's get started. Okay, so first step on getting your Dana 50 off your truck, I like to drain fluids out of everything, that way it doesn't create a mess on the ground. I've already taken the calipers off and drained as much brake fluid as possible from the system on the front. So now I'm going to remove the pumpkin from the back and drain all the gear oil out of the differential to minimize my mess later. And the bolts on these front covers are 9/16. Now for the last bolt on this, because you don't want it just falling off of the truck and causing a mess, partially thread one back in by hand or with your tool, like so. And now you can go on the back of the pumpkin, break it off with the I-beam, and be able to drain out your gear fluid. Now with the drain pan of your choice underneath your front pumpkin, what you're going to want to do is take some sort of shock mallet or a hammer, possibly a jack, or just brute force and lift up the bottom of the pumpkin to drain all your excess gear fluid out of it. You may possibly also need a pry bar or a screwdriver to get underneath it to break that seal loose. In my case, I don't think I'm going to need to do so, but we'll wait and see and adjust as needed. So it seems like that pumpkin sealed on there pretty tight. So I'm going to come back to you guys in a second with the tools to get it off. Okay, so I was able to go in successfully off camera and put a jack underneath the back of this yoke here and lift up the differential and break the RTV loose off of this pumpkin from the twin I-beam here itself. Most of it drained in the initial lifting it up, so I was not able to capture that part on camera, but I will demonstrate the fact that you are able to get underneath this differential and lift it and hold it up and allow your gear oil to drain out of your pumpkin into a catch can of some sort. Once you've drained it to a satisfactory level, go ahead and reinstall the front cover bolts into your TTB, into your pumpkin. That way your pumpkin doesn't try and delete itself and fall off. Alright, so the next step in removing your Dana 50 TTB is getting rid of your U-bolts from your leaf springs to your axles. I personally like starting with the driver's side because this is the heavier and awkward side with the pumpkin being attached. And the bolts, or the nuts underneath on these U-bolts, are going to be 13/16. I am going to be using a 1/2-inch electric impact to remove them. You can use anything you want to take them off, whatever is convenient for you. I recommend either a jack stand or a jack underneath just to hold it up so it doesn't fall on you or on the ground when you're removing it. Sometimes these nuts will get stuck in your socket because of rust. This is mostly surface rust for our area. For you guys in the rust belt, this task might be a little bit easier if you take a torch or a grinder and cut these off and replace these. It just depends upon your circumstances and where you're at. Once you've gotten these all loose to a point where you can take them out by hand the rest of the way, go ahead and do so. Your lower U-bolt bracket here is going to fall off, and in my case, my truck has factory front sway bars, so you may need to remove these if you have these. If not, then this part does not include you. That's one U-bolt removed. That's two with your lower U-bolt bracket. Go ahead and remove your U-bolts from your leaf springs and your TTB. At the same time, while you're there, if you have your shocks off, go ahead and remove your shock mount off on the top of your leaf spring. Now, what you're able to do is either use your jack and very gently lower this down, and you decide to set this on the ground out of the way, and move on to the next side. So in this case, I have mine up on a jack, and I'm going to go ahead and lower it down gently. I'll let it rest down on the ground. And if I need to, I'll pick it up slightly and get it off the jack to get the jack out of the way. In this case, I'm going to have to do so. This procedure is pretty much universal to both sides, so I'm only going to show the operation for this on the driver's side. So I will catch you guys after I get the passenger side off and both TTBs are sitting on the ground. Okay, next step is to remove the twin beam from the cross member pivot bushings. If you see here in frame, you'll notice that bolt's already been loosened slightly, so it's almost ready to come off, but not quite. If you look just to the right and down below it, this U-joint here for the axle shaft is going into what is facing the passenger side of the differential. Further down on your truck and mine, any TTB truck that's four-wheel drive, there is a boot here. And you'll notice that my boot's already gone because I have replaced this boot once before because it failed. So mine was done with hose clamps that were 5/16, and I was able to just unbolt them and slide that boot down. From the factory, you'll need a pair of either needle nose or dikes to cut those off. You need to remove that boot in order to lower this side because you want to undo that pivot bushing bolt first and lower the back and disconnect the axle shaft from the passenger side twin beam into that coupling there. So I will go ahead and do that. The head side of the bolt is an 18 millimeter and the nut side is a 21 millimeter. And what I'm going to do is jack up underneath that pivot bushing to hold it and secure it in place for the most part so it doesn't fall. And I'm going to undo the bolt the rest that way and get my pry bar or screwdriver right in behind this nut, pop it out back out of the back side of the cross member there, and gently lower this down. And the theory being, when you lower it down, it will disconnect itself from the axle here going into the differential. So let's go ahead and take care of that, and I'll bring you guys back once that's taken care of. Okay guys, we're back now with the passenger side TTB off. This side is the easiest side to work on by far because it is lacking the weight of the pumpkin on the driver's side. So I recommend starting with the passenger side. It is easiest to access that pivot bushing bolt in the back and to just grab it right here where your U-bolts usually are and just kind of manhandle it and slide it out off of the U-joint. If I bring you up, you will notice that our U-joint there that used to be connected with our axle shaft to the passenger side is no longer connected. Inside of this it is splined, and those splines will slide out of here pretty easily as long as these aren't too terribly rusted. If these are rusted, you might have a little bit more of a difficult time, but it is not impossible. So the next step now will be going for the front driver side pivot bushing bolts on the cross member. Once this bolt is removed, we'll be able to repeat the same process of lowering this side down carefully. This side will be done with the jack though, because I do not feel like trying to manhandle this side by myself. If you have a buddy or two to help you, you can have one or two of them hold this up while somebody unbolts it and lower it down gently. But in my case, being by myself, I'll use a jack and figure it out. But that's the next step. And same thing, 21 millimeter nut, 18 millimeter bolt, and it'll come out pretty easily. So now with one of our last final steps left here, what we have to do now is unbolt these pivot bushing. I guess pivot bushing bars is the best name I can think for them. So you got two bolts on the front of your cross member here that need to become undone. These are both 21 millimeters. There should be 4 of these under here, but at some point it looks like somebody's been in here and removed one. So I only have 3 in here, but there should be 4. These are also 21 millimeter, but up on top of our cross member here, you probably cannot see those, but are 15 millimeter bolt heads that have to be held onto with a wrench to undo these 4. And then on the back of our cross member, same thing, 2 21 millimeter bolts, and both these brackets here and here will come out. And you will have fully removed almost everything you're going to need to do for a Dana 60 swap, at least in my case. I have these brackets left, both of my leaf springs, and then I'm also removing the factory 3/4 ton gas engine front sway bar, because I have a factory 1 ton Dana 60 sway bar that I will be installing at a later date. So for the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and go off camera and get these guys out. These are pretty straightforward. When I've done that, I'll come back and we'll go over how to get the leaf spring bolts out, and we'll go from there. Alrighty guys, now with these 2 pivot bushing brackets off of the cross member, one of the last few steps I have left for my swap at this point is I am replacing my factory leaf springs with new 1 ton leafs. These are the 3/4 ton twin I-beam leaf springs, so these are rated for almost 4,000 pounds, which for what I'm trying to do with this truck are a little heavy duty, and I don't want that rough of a ride, so I upgraded, or depending upon how you look at it, downgraded to a set of 2,200 pound springs designed for Dana 60 solid front axles. So now what you're going to need to do for this portion of the job is here on your leaf spring bolts. It's a 21 millimeter nut, a 21 millimeter bolt. Same thing as the other processes. You can use hand tools, power tools, whatever suits your needs. I'm going to use my 21mm wrench and my 1/2 inch impact with a 21mm socket and buzz these guys off real quick. Super quick, easy, nothing to it, but I will record it just because. Alright, with the nut off of there now, what you need to do, and these are not too terribly heavy, they're about 50 to 80 pounds a piece depending upon how many pads there are and their weight rating. These ones currently I believe are about 60 to 70 at most. What I'm going to do, just kind of lift it up, shimmy this bolt out. May have to crawl over there to get at it, but you guys get the point. Go ahead and take this out, and then we will go from there onto the front. Well guys, it never fails being a typical Ford. The bolt for the passenger side gets caught on the heat shrouding for the exhaust. So what we're going to end up doing is actually dropping the front of the leaf spring first before we can get the rear out. That way I can manhandle this and get enough of a tweak on it to get that bolt out. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and get this front one out first and we'll go from there. I'm going to go ahead and go to the front of it, hold it up so I can get that bolt out and lower it down gently. Just as a total side note, as you can see here in the back, that one is unfortunately jammed up against that exhaust pipe. This is only, I'm going to assume this is only an issue with the 460s or the 5.8 Windsor trucks, because they have this larger heat shroud on here. But now with this out, I have enough of a angle on it to try and tweak it out of there. So when I get this one out, I'll let you guys know, and we'll move on to the next side. Okay guys, I'm back. So you can obviously tell that the leaf spring is no longer in place on that shackle. So if you happen to have an OBS Ford, probably I'm going to assume this is similar all the way through from 1980 to about 1997, 1998, that if you have one of these gas trucks, they have these heat shrouds here to protect your transmission lines. So if you have these, what I did is I took a 4x4 and laid it horizontally with the pipe so it would load or lift it evenly and not just put stress on one small spot, but it would distribute that load. And lifted this up just enough to knock out that bolt. So unlike Ford, I'm going to do the intelligent thing when I reinstall it, and reinstall it head out. So it's a little bit easier next time when I decide to remove this if I ever need to. Should have probably thought about that from the factory, but we all know Ford's infinite mind and wisdom. So I'm going to go over to the next side. I'm going to and just remove it. It's the same process over there, except there's no exhaust pipe in the way on that side. So I'm going to get that side off, and then I'll bring you guys back when I go to take off this front sway bar. Alright, so as we see here, there's two 9/16 bolts on this sway bar bracket mounted to the frame. Not every single one of these trucks was equipped with this. I've heard word of mouth before that the only trucks that were equipped with front sway bars were the non-diesels, I believe up until either 95 or 96. So on the gas trucks, because the core support is almost level with the frame, they're able to put this bracket in. So the only way you could really get a sway barred diesel is if it was a 1-ton where the sway bar mounts off the back of the axle. So what we're going to do is remove these two 9/16 bolts. On this side, we're going to leave these bushings in place for the sway bar and just drop the whole thing off. So I'm going to do it on this side, show you guys how to do that, and then I'm going to remove it on the other side, and then I'll bring you guys back once it's all done. Alright, I lied. Not 9/16. Hold on. Alrighty, I have returned with the correct size socket now. It's actually, these are all 1/2 inch. And you can see the little bit of dust coming out of those, it's all rust. So even with it being a California truck, sometimes you just can't escape it. Alright, with that side loose, you can obviously see it's trying to come off right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go get the other side off, and then I will bring you guys back. Okay guys, so with all that said and done, that pretty much wraps up getting off all of your hardware and all your mounting and everything else for your factory sway bar, your leaf springs, and your TTB Dana 50. So from this step forward, you can go ahead and drop in your new Dana 60, and then from there you can have a Dana 60 swapped OBS F250. What I'm going to do while I have the truck this torn apart because of all this grease and oil built up into these nooks and crannies underneath the engine, I'm going to go ahead and do a full undercarriage cleaning, just make it nice and pretty. So go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and if you got any questions, just leave them down below, and go ahead and check out my Instagram at TTB Removal.